Is there anything more appalling than the image of a condemned man standing atop a wooden stage, a tightening rope around his neck, thousands of faces gazing in granite silence? And then, snap, the trapdoor falls, and history has another casualty: the gallows, possibly the most identifiable, most feared, and most incendiary devices of execution throughout the annals of mankind. But how exactly did it work? Why was it so widespread for centuries? And was it truly as agonizing as we've been led to believe? In this episode, we're exploring the gallows, the agonizing method of execution, using the detailed explanation framework: history, evolution, method, psychology, cultural meaning, and legacy. So stick around. You might never look at this device the same way again. Hanging as an instrument of execution has a history dating back thousands of years. It is referred to in ancient Persian, Greek, and Roman literature. The gallows, or specially constructed wooden platform, was not a standard public mode of execution until the Middle Ages. By the 12th century in France and England, indeed, gallows were a legal tool of state justice. Justice was not simply punitive then. It was also public, ritual, and deterrent. In England, the worst of them was the Tyburn tree, a gigantic triangular gallows just north of London, where dozens at a time were put to death. They were big public affairs, with tens of thousands present. The men were taken through town, usually in open wagons, and hanged publicly with weeping or laughing thousands. Public hangings weren't just punishments. Public hangings were spectacles. So what did a real hanging look like? Early executioners used a simple method called the short drop. The victims were shoved or thrown from the cart or ladder and died slowly, most commonly from strangulation. It may take some excruciating minutes. The break did not always occur in the neck, but rather, the man was choked when the rope constricted around his windpipe. By the 19th century, a more humane technique was developed: the long drop. The technique was intended to ensure virtually instantaneous death through measurement of the drop to cause the breaking of the neck. Procedure as follows: weighing of the prisoner, determination of the exact drop needed, measured rope in fixed position noose, trapdoor release system triggered by lever. When done correctly, the vertebrae would break, causing unconsciousness and quick death. But what if there was an error? The result was ghastly. Either the victim was strangled to death slowly, or the fall was so gigantic that it resulted in decapitation, as did regretfully occur in a few hundred 19th century executions. The executioners were not only technicians, but also actors. Imagine the days or weeks prior to a public hanging. The prisoners usually spent their time on what was known as death row, or in an exhibition cell near the gallows, drilling in the background as the workers readied the scaffold. The spiritual ceremonies, the last meal. A couple of inmates passed away with dignity. Others cried, screamed, or passed out. For most, death row prisoners were allowed time to say a last word, traditionally for apologies, protests, or prayers. Those final minutes made an indelible impression on the popular psyche. Public hangings sparked an unusual social function as well. They were a public spectacle on a grand scale in 18th century England. People came from towns, picnicked, and treated hangings as parties. There were even peddlers of criminal ballads and pamphlets. Children came too. And yet, the public rituals evoked conflicting emotions: sympathy, horror, relief, or even pleasure. The hanged were both villain and victim. Hanging was not only reserved for criminals, it was a tool of power. Governments and monarchs employed the gallows to kill enemies and bluff opposition. To offend the state in England was a capital crime, from murder to stealing a handkerchief. Under King Henry VIII, more than 72,000 people are estimated to have been put to death, many of them by hanging. Political dissidents, religious heretics, and rebels were also put to death on the scaffold. Hanging royalists and republicans was also a characteristic of the 17th century English Civil War. Mary Surratt, Lincoln assassination plotter, was the first woman to be executed by the U.S. federal government in 1882 by hanging, and in and after World War II, gallows were employed at the Nuremberg trials. 10 of the high-ranking Nazi officials, including Joachim von Ribbentrop and Wilhelm Keitel, were hanged for war crimes. The hangings were symbolic justice, but also provoked questions about whether hanging was an appropriate punishment for such atrocities. Other cultures viewed hanging differently. In Christian Europe, the hanging was universally viewed as a morally upright means of punishment. Hanging represented the justice and cleansing of God. In some versions, hanging held the soul between heaven and earth, a state of accountability en route. In Islamic law, hanging was reserved sparingly, with other methods of execution like beheading being more typical. In East Asia, beheading or shooting using a gun were preferred practices. Hanging was not decorous in some cultures. Quite surprisingly, the social status of the victim mostly determined the practice. Nobility across Europe were traditionally beheaded, cleaner and more noble, while commoners were hanged. This accounts for the gallows not just as an instrument of punishment, but also as a reflection of society's values, hierarchies, and attitudes to dignity in death. Popular opinion had changed by the late 19th century. The hanging ritual became more ghastly than intriguing to the public. Hanging was grisly, error-prone, and stigmatizing to society, reformers argued. Western nations during the early 20th century moved executions behind prison walls or abolished them. The guillotine, electric chair, gas chamber, and ultimately lethal injection were alternatives that replaced the gallows. These were packaged as modern and humane, though each had moral flaws inherent in them. Hanging nowadays is legal in only a handful of countries, Iran and Japan, and is carried out sporadically in others. It remains as a metaphor and joke. Think gallows humor, or left hanging, for example. And as a form of punishment, its official existence is all but over. Was the gallows effective as a deterrent? A weapon of fear, then. Its symbolism and effectiveness made it one of the longest-standing means of execution throughout history. Yet its cruelty, long-term deaths, and use as spectacle make us pause to ask if it was ever just at all. The gallows serves to remind us that how a society punishes is as much a revelation about the society itself as how it rewards. It makes us reflect on power, pain, and the price of justice. Thanks for watching. If you liked this lesson in history, subscribe, like, and tell us what you think in the comments below. What do you think of the gallows? Are they just desserts or a barbaric relic? Let us know, and remember, history is never about the past. It's always about how we make sense of ourselves in the present. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.